A humble cleaning lady helped him without expecting anything in return, without knowing that he was a millionaire who would fall in love with her. The rain fell like punishment over London that November night. It wasn't a light or refreshing rain. It was a dense cold storm with gusts of wind that bent umbrellas inside out and made pedestrians quicken their pace to escape the harsh weather. The city was deserted at that hour, save for the distant echo of a car horn or the metallic screech of the underground somewhere beyond the Thames. Emma Rivers clutched her broken umbrella with one hand and a bag of cleaning supplies with the other, walking quickly along the flooded sidewalks. Her dark hair pulled back in a bun was soaked, and her work apron still hung over her cheap clothes. She had just finished her shift as a cleaner, in the most elegant building on Regent Street, and the dampness chilled her to the bone. But what weighed heaviest that night wasn't the cold, but the silence. That silence that always accompanied her when she walked home alone, while everyone else slept in warm sheets dreaming of futures that didn't belong to her. Her gaze was fixed on the puddles, dodging loose paving stones to avoid getting her feet even wetter, when a strange sound cut through the air. A dry metallic screech, followed by a brutal crash. She stopped dead and turned her head. A few meters away, on a poorly lit curve of the street, a black car had lost control, skidding on the wet asphalt, until it crashed into a wall. Glass shattered into 1,000 pieces, the headlights hung loose, and an even denser silence covered the scene. Emma stood paralyzed for a moment. No one else on the street, no one else to help. She could have turned around and continued on her way. After all, what did she have to do with that accident? It was probably just another reckless, arrogant rich man playing with his own fate, but her feet were already carrying her toward him. She ran, her heart pounding hard at her temples, slipping in the puddles with trembling hands. The car was smoking, twisted like a crushed can. As she approached, she could see him, a tall man in a dark suit, leaning against the wall trying to stay on his feet. His face was bloodied, his eyes dim, and his labored breathing mingled with the vapor of the cold rain. Emma dropped her umbrella without thinking, and grabbed his arm. "Don't speak, stay calm," she murmured, though he didn't seem to hear her completely. He tried to pull away, proud even in his fragility, but his knees gave way, and he ended up leaning completely on her. Emma, with barely any strength, held him as best she could, reaching for her phone in her pocket to call emergency services. While she helped him sit on the curb, while the rain continued to punish the city, he raised his gaze to her for the first time. His gray eyes, clouded with pain, met hers, and something inexplicable passed between them. Just for an instant, there was no gratitude yet, no sweet words, just two lonely souls, each broken in their own way, finding each other in the middle of a night that neither would ever forget. And while she pressed his hand to keep him conscious, he murmured a single phrase before fainting, "Don't leave me." And Emma, without knowing who he was, without imagining what that decision would mean for her own life, responded firmly, "I won't." If this story has already touched your heart in these first moments, don't forget to subscribe for more tales that move the soul. Emma didn't sleep that night. After the ambulance took the injured man away, she returned to her room with frozen hands and a racing heart. The rain kept beating against the windows, while the entire city seemed oblivious to the small hurricane that had settled in her chest. Her room was barely larger than a closet. The peeling walls were adorned with photos of a family that was no longer there, memories of a village south of Manchester that she had left behind years ago. The mattress on the floor, a broken chair, and a small table with a half-consumed candle. And in the middle of that humid silence, she couldn't stop reliving the stranger's gaze, the mute plea in his eyes before he fainted, the way he had clung to her hand, as if she were his last hope. But the next morning, life continued, just as gray. She got up early, washed her apron, and went to work as always. In the building's changing room, some colleagues whispered gossip about the businessmen who went up and down the glass elevators, about their expensive suits and gold watches. For Emma, they were all the same, men and women from another galaxy, incapable of seeing those who cleaned up after them each night. Her workday passed in silence. As usual, she polished floors, dusted desks, emptied trash cans. Sometimes she stopped for a few seconds in front of the top floor windows to look at the city from up there, wondering what it felt like to have the world at your feet. But none of that was for her. It never had been. She had barely finished school, and had gone to the city at 18 to find work. Her father had died too young, her mother had been left without strength, and she, the eldest of 4 siblings, had learned to resign herself. No one would come to rescue her. No one thought about the calloused hands that scrubbed their bathrooms. That's why, that night, when she saw the man collapsed on the asphalt, her instinct wasn't to ask who he was, or why he was there. She just thought someone needed help, that it didn't matter if he was rich or poor, kind or arrogant. And yet in some corner of her mind, that strange sensation kept floating, the warmth with which he unconsciously had squeezed her hand, as if he had chosen her in that darkness, as if he knew she would be the only one capable of not letting go. As evening fell, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a leaden sky, and puddles that reflected the city lights. Emma stayed a little longer cleaning the top floor offices, alone, trying to distract herself. But when she found herself standing before the windows again, looking at the city from above, she felt that something in her life had just turned. She didn't know what it was yet. She only knew that her heart no longer beat with the same resignation as the night before. Maybe, a gesture of kindness could change more than someone else's life. Maybe, it could also change her own. The first time Thomas Wakefield opened his eyes, the hospital seemed as cold and silent as his own soul. The monotonous beeping of the machines beside him was almost unbearable. He tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through his ribs, and forced him to close his eyes again. Some nurses whispered in the corner of the room, reviewing his medical chart. They explained that he had suffered a serious accident, though miraculously without irreversible injuries. He would only be left with scars, and a strict order for absolute rest for a few weeks. But none of that mattered to him. When he was finally alone, his mind didn't dwell on his destroyed car, or the cursed curve where he skidded. He didn't think about the company either, or the contracts that were probably waiting for him on his desk. The only thing that came to his memory, over and over again, was the face of the woman who had knelt over him in the rain. Her intense, dark, determined gaze. The way she didn't hesitate to hold him when he collapsed. Her low, reassuring voice, telling him, "I won't," when he begged her not to leave him. He, Thomas Wakefield, son of one of the most influential families in England, accustomed to models and executives willing to please him, couldn't get that simple woman out of his head. With rough hands and eyes full of a sadness that had shaken him, he closed his eyes tightly. He didn't want to remember any of that. Not that night, not that plea, not that unknown sensation that for the first time in years he had needed someone, but he couldn't help it. The image of the young woman with the apron and soaked hair returned to him with painful clarity. The next day, a nurse brought him a bouquet of flowers with an anonymous note, "Thank you for not giving up. I hope you recover soon." Thomas looked at it for a long time, caressing the petals, with an ironic smile. It wasn't anonymous, it could only have been her. Suddenly, he felt uncomfortable. He wasn't used to gratitude, much less to unconditional kindness. In his world, every gesture had a price, every caress a purpose, every word an interest. But she hadn't asked him for anything. Nothing. And that disarmed him. He ordered his assistant to find out who had called emergency services that night. And when he finally learned her name, Emma Rivers, he looked her up in the employee database of the building he himself owned. There she was, a gray file, a small black and white photo, a salary that barely covered survival. His finger remained still on the screen, tracing the cold lines of that file. Why did he care so much? Why did he feel that this woman had touched something inside him that he thought had been dead for years? He remembered the accident, the curve, the speed. He remembered the moment he saw her, and for the first time since his wife's death, Thomas felt something like hope. Something as tiny and fragile as a match lighting in the darkness. Something he didn't understand yet. Have you ever helped someone without knowing how important that gesture would be for their life? Tell us about your experience in the comments. 2 days passed before Emma saw her name again. It was in the form of a white envelope, carefully placed on her cleaning cart at the beginning of her night shift. No sender, no letterhead, just her name, Emma Rivers. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside was an elegant card, with a delicate gold embossed border, a few brief lines, written in confident handwriting. "Thank you for staying. For not looking at me like everyone else does. Untold." And a bouquet of white lilies waited next to the cart, with a pearl gray ribbon. Emma felt a wave of warmth rise up her neck. She looked around, afraid that someone had seen the small improvised shrine. There was no one in the hallway yet. She leaned over the flowers, smelled them with a mixture of tenderness and shame. But immediately after, she left them on the empty reception desk chair. She couldn't take them with her. She shouldn't. That man, was too far from her world. Too far. So she decided to ignore the note. She kept silent. She continued with her work. But the flowers kept appearing there every night. Different each time. One day lilies, another tulips, then wild daisies. Always discreet, never too ostentatious, but impossible to ignore. And the card always said the same thing. "Thank you." In the hospital, Thomas checked every morning if his assistant brought him any message, a call, something that indicated she had accepted his gesture, but nothing came. Nothing, just stubborn silence. And that intrigued him even more, because all the other women in his life would have run to him for much less. They would have accepted flowers, dinners, jewelry. They would have played the seduction game out of pure ambition. But not her. She was rejecting him with disconcerting calm. So a week later, as soon as he was discharged, he dressed in simple clothes, put on a dark coat, and waited at the end of the night shift at the corner of the building where she worked. He saw her leave through the service door, her hair pulled back and a worn scarf around her neck. She walked quickly, as if she wanted to disappear into the late crowd. He followed her at a slow pace, respecting the distance. When he finally dared to call her by name, she stopped dead, giving him her back for a long second before turning around. "Mr. Wakefield," she murmured, in a low voice, recognizing him instantly. Thomas sketched a half smile, and took a couple of steps toward her. "Thank you." Again. "It wasn't necessary," she replied, lowering her gaze. "It was for me." The silence between them weighed more than the entire night, only broken by the murmur of cars in the distance, and Emma's contained breathing. He, accustomed to controlling every word, every reaction, felt clumsy for the first time in years, like an insecure teenager. "Would you allow me to invite you for coffee, just to thank you properly?" Emma looked into his eyes, and in them she saw only sincerity, no trace of pity, or arrogance, or condescension. "That's why." After a brief silence, she nodded. That coffee, she thought as they walked together toward a nearby cafe, would be the first crack in her world of walls and solitude. But she didn't know it yet. The cafe was small and warm, with dark wood tables and hanging lamps that cast golden light over the steaming cups. Outside, the rain had returned, beating against the windows with a soft rhythm, like a curtain separating them from the outside world. Emma sat across from him, rigid, not letting go of her purse, while Thomas watched her in silence, his fingers intertwined on the table. He wore a gray coat, and a perfectly arranged scarf, but his eyes had that same clouded gray she had seen the night of the accident. A waiter approached, left 2 coffees on the table, and withdrew without interrupting them. She took a timid sip, trying to find something to say, while he simply watched her, as if trying to memorize every gesture, every movement of her hands, every blink of her eyes. "It wasn't necessary," she said finally, breaking the silence. "Yes, it was," he replied, without looking away. His tone was soft, almost fragile, and that nuance surprised Emma, accustomed to seeing men of his status as inexpressive statues, confident in their power. But Thomas didn't seem confident of anything at that moment. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," she added. "For me it was," he answered. Emma lowered her gaze, stirring the coffee with the spoon, listening to the slight tinkling against the porcelain. She didn't understand why she was there, why she had accepted. Maybe because for the first time in years, someone was looking at her, as if she were really theirs. As if her existence mattered. Thomas rested an elbow on the table, leaning slightly toward her. That night, when I lost control of the car, but I was convinced it wasn't worth continuing. His voice was so low that Emma barely heard it over the rain. I didn't think anyone would stop to help me. And then, you appeared. She felt a knot in her throat. He continued. You didn't know who I was, and still, you didn't hesitate. Emma looked up, and their eyes met for the first time without fear. There was something in the way she looked at him that made her think of a wounded animal, proud but needing warmth. They didn't talk much more after that. Sometimes words get in the way, when the truth has already been spoken. They finished their coffee in silence, listening to the rain, but something new floated in the air, a silent electricity. A promise that neither of them dared to formulate yet. When leaving the cafe, Thomas held the door for her, like an ancient and forgotten gesture, and she, as she passed beside him, felt a shiver on her skin, as if the cold of the night could no longer touch her. She walked beside him for a couple of blocks. He didn't accompany her to her door. He knew, instinctively, that she needed that small stretch alone. That intimacy must be built slowly, like a fire that takes time to catch but burns stronger. When they said goodbye, he only said thank you, again, and she, without thinking too much, replied, You're welcome. But as she closed the door of her building behind her, her heart was beating so fast that she had to lean against the wall to catch her breath. She didn't know what she was beginning to feel. She only knew it was impossible to ignore anymore. The following days were a whirlwind of feelings that Emma didn't know how to name. Every night, at the end of her shift, she found him at the corner of the building, waiting for her. Sometimes they talked for a few minutes while walking under the drizzle. Sometimes they shared a quick coffee in the same cafe, with the same wooden tables, and the same warm lamps. Thomas was different from everything she had imagined. He wasn't arrogant, or cold, or condescending. He had a serene calm, a wounded gaze, a way of leaning toward her, as if her voice were the only one capable of rescuing him from silence. And yet, something in Emma whispered that this wasn't real, that it couldn't be real. The truth came like a slap one ordinary night. While cleaning one of the most luxurious offices in the building, she heard her name in the mouths of two executives leaving the elevator. Wakefield's son is chasing after one of the cleaning girls. Which one? The brunette, the one who works on the upper floors. Emma, I think her name is. Seriously, with all the women he could have. That's a joke. The men's laughter floated in the hallway. As they walked away, Emma felt red heat rise up her cheeks. The bucket of water almost slipped from her hands. Wakefield's son. Of course she had heard that surname. Of course she knew who he was. Owners of half the district. Of that same building. Of hotels and shopping centers throughout the city. She scrubbed the floors he walked on every day, and suddenly everything collapsed for her. The flowers, the notes, the coffees, the looks, everything became a cruel misunderstanding. She was nothing more than a whim for a man who could buy whatever he wanted, a passing entertainment for someone bored with his own solitude. That same night, seeing him waiting for her at the corner, as always, Emma changed her route without saying a word. He tried to follow her, call her, but she didn't look back. Thomas caught up with her halfway down the block. Emma, what's wrong? He asked, breathless, catching her arm. She turned, striking him with eyes wet with rage and shame. What's wrong? That I'm not your toy, that I'm not part of your world. Don't use me to feel better about yourself. Her voice trembled, but she didn't step back. It's not that, he said almost in a whisper. She replied, pulling away from his hand. You have everything, and I have nothing. Don't make me believe for a second that this is more than a fantasy for you. Without waiting for an answer, she turned around and disappeared into the rain. Thomas stood there, alone, under a streetlight, feeling how the ice-cold water soaked him to the bones. For the first time in his life, he realized he had no idea how to truly approach someone. Not with all the flowers, not with all the words, but seeing her walk away, he knew he couldn't give up. Not this time. The next day, at the end of her shift, Emma found something unexpected. Not flowers, not cards. Thomas, standing in front of the door of her neighborhood, soaked, alone, with his gaze fixed on her. His mere presence there, in that humble place, among neighbors who looked at him with suspicion and curiosity, was enough to make her stop, because that was no longer a fantasy. It was him. Emma didn't know what to do when she saw him there, waiting for her, with his clothes soaked and his hair stuck to his forehead by the rain. Her neighbors looked at him from the windows, murmured from half-open doors, as if Thomas's presence on that narrow poor street was a scene too absurd to be real. She pressed her lips together, and stood still for a few seconds, with the keys in her hand. The anger still boiled in her blood, but deep down, deeper, there was something worse than anger, fear. Of what he awakened in her, fear of not being able to control it, fear that everything would end badly. Thomas took a step toward her. "I don't care what you think of me. I don't care what others say." His voice sounded hoarse, wounded. "I only care about what happened that night, what I felt, when you looked at me." She stared at him, also soaked by the rain, trying to maintain the hardness in her face. "And what did you feel?" she asked. Finally, defiantly, Thomas looked down for a moment, as if it was hard for him to pronounce the words. "I felt that for the first time in years, someone really saw me, not because of the surname, not because of the money, but me." Emma felt a knot in her throat, but she didn't give in. "And you, who do you see when you look at me?" she asked. He looked at her again, his gray eyes shining with sincerity, under the rain. "Someone stronger than me. Someone who didn't give up when everyone else already had. Someone who saved me, when I no longer wanted to save myself." The words pierced her like a slow knife. She wanted to say something, anything, but her voice betrayed her. She lowered her gaze, unable to bear the weight of that confession. Thomas took another step, and stood in front of her, so close she could hear his labored breathing. "I lost my wife 3 years ago," he confessed in a low voice, barely audible over the sound of the rain. "I watched her die in front of me, and since then I've been nothing, just an empty man. I thought I would never care about anyone again, until you appeared." Emma slowly raised her gaze. The hardness in her eyes began to dissolve under the intensity of his. In that instant, something changed. The walls she had built her entire life began to crack, because what she saw in Thomas's eyes wasn't arrogance, or whim, or pity. It was pain, and truth. He extended a trembling hand toward her. "I'm not asking for anything more than a chance to prove it to you." Emma breathed deeply. Her fingers barely touched his for a second, and then she stepped back, undecided. But she didn't reject him. She didn't accept him either. She simply looked at him, and for the first time since she met him, smiled slightly, like someone beginning to forgive. Thomas closed his eyes, relieved by that minimal crack of hope, because for him, that small smile was worth more than all the jewels in the world. If this confession also moved you, don't forget to leave your like. Your support keeps us telling more stories like this. The next morning dawned without rain, but the city was still wrapped in that indecisive gray of autumn. For Emma, however, something was no longer the same. For the first time in years, she woke up with the feeling that the day could be different. In the changing room mirror, while adjusting her apron before her shift, she surprised herself combing her hair more carefully, tucking a loose strand behind her ear. It wasn't vanity, it was something else, something softer, more intimate, a slight desire to be seen. That night, leaving the building, she found him waiting for her again at the corner. He no longer asked permission. He didn't ask if he could accompany her. He simply started walking beside her, and she said nothing. That's how the days passed. Night walks under dim lights, quick coffees in silent cafes, scarce words and looks that spoke for themselves. Sometimes the tip of her fingers brushed his, not yet daring to intertwine them. Other times, when he smiled, a shy smile, nothing like the confident and cold gesture he showed others. Emma felt a strange warmth in her chest, as if someone had lit a candle inside her. It didn't take long before the city started talking. Her work colleagues, with their insinuating looks and whispered comments. So the little princess is now dating the owner. What does she think? She only cleans toilets. We already know how these stories end. The neighbors on her street, spying from windows every time they saw him arrive with his dark car. People stepping aside when he took her arm naturally in the markets, as if that small gesture were a public offense. Emma felt the weight of all those gazes on the back of her neck. Every time he picked her up, her heart beat between fear and happiness. Because in her interior, she kept repeating the same question: how real could all this be? How long would it take to wake up and realize it was just a dream? One night, sitting on a park bench after a long walk, he noticed she was quieter than usual. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, softly. Emma breathed deeply before answering. "About what others say. About how you and I aren't from the same world." Thomas looked at her with a calm that disconcerted her. Then he leaned toward her, enough so she could feel the warmth of his breath. "I no longer belong to any world. Not yours, not mine, and I don't care. I just want to be here, with you." Emma looked at him for a long time, feeling tears burn behind her eyelids. Maybe she was still afraid, maybe she still doubted herself, but for the first time in her life, she felt it was worth trying. And that night, while he finally took her hand without her pulling it away, she knew she had chosen to take the risk, because some decisions aren't made with the head, but with the heart. The invitation arrived one afternoon, when Emma least expected it. A cream envelope, with her name written in black ink, delivered by Thomas himself, while she finished cleaning an office. She didn't want to open it in front of him, but his eyes obliged her. Inside was a short and simple note. "Come tonight. I don't want us to keep hiding," and an address: the most luxurious restaurant in the entire city, a place she had only seen in magazines, while cleaning tables in mediocre cafeterias. That night, while looking at herself in the mirror with a dress borrowed from a colleague, her heart was racing. She didn't know if she should go. She didn't know if she was ready to face the looks, the whispers, the veiled humiliation of those who didn't believe someone like her deserved to be there. But something inside her decided to walk forward. The restaurant was full of elegant people, dark suits, expensive watches, jewelry shining under crystal chandeliers. When she entered, the murmurs didn't take long to spread like fire on paper. She knew what they thought. She read it in every pair of eyes that followed her. What is she doing here? Who let her in? Thomas was waiting for her standing next to a table at the back of the room. When he saw her, his expression lit up with a warmth that melted part of her fear. But before she could reach him, a blonde woman, impeccably dressed, blocked her path. "Excuse me, dear," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This isn't the place for you." Emma felt her cheeks burn. Everyone's eyes fixed on her. Around her, more murmurs, more whispers. For a second she was about to turn around and run away, but she didn't. She raised her head, breathed deeply, and spoke with a voice that surprised even herself. "You're right. This isn't my place. But it's not yours to decide where I can be either." The blonde blinked, astonished, and Emma took another step, going around her, until she stood in front of Thomas. He, who had witnessed the entire scene from a distance, couldn't help but smile with pride. Thomas offered her his hand without caring about the dozens of pairs of eyes watching them, and she took it. Then he turned to all those present. "I want everyone to meet her." His voice resonated in the room. "This is Emma, and she's the only person who has taught me what really matters." There was an uncomfortable silence, broken only by a timid applause from a waiter in the corner, then another, and another, until little by little, the entire room ended up applauding, though many didn't know why. Emma looked at him, still with tears contained in her eyes, and felt for the first time in her life that she had nothing to be ashamed of, that her dignity, her worth, her truth, were hers, and no one could take them away. That night, in the middle of a room full of strangers, Thomas intertwined his fingers with hers and whispered in her ear, "Now you know what you mean to me." Emma smiled, finally at peace with herself, because for the first time she also knew what she meant to herself. A year later, London remained the same melancholic city as always, the same avenues dressed in grey, the same ancient facades that seemed to guard secrets behind each balcony, the same intermittent rains that forced people to take shelter in narrow doorways. But for Emma, nothing was the same. She walked down Regent Street with her head held high, with a new serenity in her eyes. Her dark hair, now loose and shining, fell over her shoulders. On her left hand, intertwined with Thomas's, a discreet ring sparkled under the afternoon light. He walked beside her, not with the haughty confidence of a man accustomed to owning everything, but with the tranquility of someone who had finally found the only thing he really needed. They went unnoticed by most. They were just another couple among the crowd, but for them, that simple walk together was a victory against everything that had once separated them. Turning a corner, she noticed a cleaner crouched in front of a shop window, polishing the glass with automatic movements, identical to those she herself had repeated for years. She stopped for a moment, watching her, remembering how that tiredness felt, that resignation, that silence no one saw, and suddenly, Thomas squeezed her hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, with that soft voice she had learned to love. Emma looked at him, and smiled. About that night, about how everything changed without expecting it. He also smiled, leaning to kiss her on the cheek. Sometimes one gesture is enough to save someone, even though that person doesn't know they're also saving you. She nodded slowly, moved, feeling tears threatening to blur her smile. "You never know who you're saving," she whispered, "when you extend your hand." They continued walking together, getting lost among the people, leaving behind the shadow of what they once were, because now they were something more, something new, something strong. Passing through a square, a street musician played a soft melody on his guitar. Thomas stopped her and made her spin, taking her by the waist clumsily to make her dance, right there under the amused gaze of some passers-by. She laughed, with a clean and sweet laugh she hadn't let out in a long time. And while they spun around, laughing as if they were the only ones in the world, Emma knew that it didn't matter what others said, or how much it had cost to get there. She was no longer the woman who hid in the shadows to clean the traces of other people's lives. She was the woman who dared to look her destiny in the face, to hold a fallen hand and discover that she was also worthy of being loved. If this story touched your heart, subscribe now to continue experiencing more tales like this full of love, hope and second chances, because sometimes one single gesture is enough to change everything.